it off today. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us for this edition of the GMF webinar series. We host this series every month where we focus a different topic focused on GMF programs. Starting in June and finishing in August, this month's webinar is part of a series where we've been tackling subjects about different ways to reach net zero GHG emissions. Today, we're going to be focusing on the role of energy efficiency in unlocking the path to net zero. My name is Emma Kirk, and I'm a project coordinator, and I'm here with my colleague, Jessie Granger, a project officer, and we're both with the Green Municipal Fund's Capacity Development Team. We're also joined today by my colleague, Naomi de Vist, an advisor with the Outreach Team. Before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement. On behalf of FCM, I'd like to begin this session by acknowledging that I'm joining you from the lands that have been inhabited by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. We at FCM recognize the Algonquin Anishinaabe as the traditional custodians of the land upon which FCM's offices are located. We also recognize the contributions of the Métis, Inuit, and all First Nations, both in shaping and strengthening this community and this country as a whole. Wherever you are, I invite you to join me in paying our respects to the original stewards of this land and committing ourselves to thoughts and actions that will lead us to meaningful reconciliation wherever we live now. We encourage you to add where you're joining from as we begin the webinar today. Before we dive in, just quick housekeeping items to get through. Today's webinar will be taking place in English with French interpretation available. To join the French interpretation, you can click in the interpretation button at the lower right of your screen. It's a little globe. Aujourd'hui, nous avons des présentations en français et en anglais. Si vous souhaitez écouter en français, veuillez cliquer sur le bouton d'interprétation en bas à droite de votre écran. C'est un petit globe et sélectionnez l'option français, s'il vous plaît. As we move through our presentations today, I ask that you submit your questions to the Q&A box as they come up. We will address them during the overall Q&A at the end of both speakers' presentations. To get through our agenda today, we have two amazing presentations from our two municipal presenters, Hemant Grover from the region of Peel and Mike Fletcher from the city of Ottawa. As I mentioned, they'll be followed by a question and answer period. At the end, Naomi de Vist from Outreach will give us a presentation on funding opportunities. So moving on into presentations, we're going to get started right off the bat with Hemant Grover from the Office of Climate Change and Energy Management in the region of Peel. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to invite Hemant to take over.
Thank you very much, Emma. Just confirming you're able to see my screen.
And Hemant, if you could just speak a little bit louder.
Okay,
Thanks.
perfect. Can you see my screen, Jessie? Am I sharing it right?
Yes, perfect.
Could I get some thumbs up somewhere?
All good.
All good. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So good afternoon or good morning, everyone. My name is Hemant Grover, manager with the Office of Climate Change and Energy Management with the region of Peel. My pleasure to be here today at this webinar with FCM. I will be speaking about the region of Peel's zero carbon affordable housing and what some of the good work that we're doing from net zero emission standards for new construction to building retrofits to energy and emissions management plan focused on affordable housing. And I will share and showcase some of the net zero emission projects that we have shoveled in the ground with. So starting off a little bit about the region of Peel. Peel is home to approximately 1.5 million residents and 175,000 businesses and is growing both rapidly in terms of GDP and population. And to serve the population, the regional municipality of Peel has been around for roughly 50 years, providing various services from water, wastewater, waste operations, paramedic, police, and affordable housing. Now, the leadership at the region of Peel also keenly recognizes the threat that climate change poses to the residents of Peel and the ability of our organization to render municipal services to our community. And to take action, Regional Council declared a climate emergency in October of 2019, and in the same council meeting approved the region's first Climate Change Master Plan. A little bit about the master plan. It is typical of most municipal master plans, climate change master plans that are in Ontario. It is a timeline of 2020 to 2030. It has an interim GHG emission reduction target of 45% by 2030 against the 2010 baseline. Be more prepared for extreme weather events, etc. There's a number of actions and activities outlined in the plan. And at the time that the plan was developed, we had estimated what the incremental capital cost would be over the next 10 years. Mind you, these numbers have increased, as everyone else who's in this field at fraternity knows. Costs have risen significantly, but also we estimated the overall cumulative operational cost savings over the life of this master plan. So with that overview of our climate change master plan umbrella, I'd like to zoom in on the region of Peel's affordable housing portfolio. Now, starting with some of the numbers that my team loves to see and share on a daily basis. So I'll highlight, this is all our municipal services that we offer: water, wastewater, operations, long-term care. And the yellow highlight is the affordable housing. And there's two sections. There's Peel Living, which is 100% owned subsidiary of the region of Peel, but there's also regional housing that we own but is managed externally. So all the affordable housing consumes roughly 18% of the total electricity draw that our organization at a corporate level consumes. Moving into natural gas, which we all know is the dirtier, both the affordable housing streams account for roughly 52% of total natural gas use. That's more than all the others combined. So again, that is a significant emission source. But looking at generally overall greenhouse gas emissions, housing accounts for roughly 18% of the total corporate emissions. But focusing on some of the climate change opportunities, actions, and results, I'm happy to share some of the good work we've done at the region of Peel. So as I mentioned, housing accounts for roughly 18% of the total greenhouse gas emission of the corporation. But as I also mentioned, we're a growing municipality. We're expecting significant growth in population. And to serve this population with affordable housing, we're adding a further 5,600 units of affordable housing over the next 10 to 15 years at the region of Peel. And we want to make sure as we grow, we do not grow our existing GHG inventory. So the question is, how do we have net zero emissions coming from new construction? So to make that possible, the region of Peel and our office has developed the region's first net zero emission standard and policy focusing on the new construction. The policy sets out the background position statement, guiding principles, and also declares the organization's commitment to ensure as we grow, as we build more, all our buildings that are built will be net zero emission. The standard sets out the metric and performance requirement for which the architects and the engineers are assigned. You shall build to the standard. Now, zooming a little bit more into the standard, the region of Peel's net zero emission standard for new construction has a technical requirement that all buildings have to adhere to the latest version of the Canada Green Building Council's zero carbon building standard. And it's an interesting pause that I'd like to make, because we had a thorough literature review of all the standards out there, and we were on the verge of developing our own standard. But again, to help the market and the fraternity understand, we adopted a national standard. But we went a little over and above what the Canada Green Building Council's zero carbon building standard allows for. We have made it a standard that all new buildings will have zero combustion on site. So no natural gas combustion. In addition, we've asked for a thermal energy demand intensity, which is a TEDI target that has to be met, that is relevant to the zone that we are in. But we've also asked that the architects and the engineers produce a climate change risk assessment. We provided, again, a guideline for that, but we want to ensure that it is a net zero emission building, but it also has the climate risk identified, and maybe some actions can be taken to reduce the climate risk of these new buildings. In the next slide, I'm happy to share one of the first buildings that we're building, which is an affordable housing building in Brampton, 200-unit high-rise multi-unit residential building, which will be the first net zero emission affordable housing that the region of Peel is building. And there's a lot of studies and case studies that I can share, but for this particular webinar, just wanted to highlight that the primary heating source for Chelsea Gardens, which is the name of this building, is ground source heat pumps. We're excited that this is one of many buildings that are in the pipeline that will be built to net zero emission. I just also want to pause that the standard is not just for affordable housing, it's for every building that the region of Peel builds, even unoccupied pumping stations, which was quite tricky, but we were able to do that. So shifting gears to the energy and emissions management plan. So now we've covered all buildings that are going to be built, but how can we take existing housing buildings onto the low carbon pathway? Well, let's get a painting of the landscape. We have roughly 95 housing buildings, 8,500 units of various archetypes and vintages, but all of these have various life. So which means that the mechanical equipment in some of these buildings is due for replacement now. Some are in 2 to 5 years. The envelope, again, a similar pattern, and we're trying to optimize the end of life of the buildings and their asset and components to take it to a low carbon pathway. And to be able to do that, we are developing or have completed the development of an energy and emissions housing management plan for the housing portfolio. And again, within the umbrella of the bigger climate change master plan, this is a focused energy emissions management plan for the housing sector. And this sets an interim GHG emission reduction target. Again, for our affordable housing, we have a corporate target, but we're setting targets for each of our portfolios. And the energy emission management plan aligns with the 10-year capital plan that we have, knowing when assets need to be replaced. And based on that, we identify projects and buildings in which we would identify what is the cost to take it to a low carbon pathway, what is the GHG emission reduction potential, and what are some of the low carbon technologies that go in there. So depicting this graphically, on the y-axis, you have GHG emissions. On the x-axis, you have a timeline. The blue line on top is the business's plan. So if we did nothing for all our affordable housing, looking at it all together, this is where our emissions would be by 2050. But with an energy emissions management plan in place, we've identified 4 energy and emission reduction scenarios that get us to our low carbon pathway of net zero by 2050, with obviously some carbon offsets. And being a little optimistic or rather balanced, we've given a interim GHG emission reduction target of 55% for affordable housing. That's a target that's been conveyed to affordable housing. And now we're making decisions with actual projects and identifying how do we bundle projects within a building to maximize our GHG emission? How do we bundle buildings together? And how do we bring the best cost and GHG optimization, but also considering tenant impact, not to have too much of a disruption to our tenants, and looking at life cycle cost. So again, in the same depiction of color, the blue is, this is a real life, an actual building that we're looking at. And the blue would be if we did nothing in the building, business is planned, versus the couple of scenarios where we would bundle the roof and ventilation upgrade, window and wall upgrade, and heating upgrade, and we're able to have an emission reduction much quicker than 2050. Or if we do a whole building retrofit, how soon can we see the cost optimization and GHG emission reduction? Now, life cycle cost helps us to identify if we are to pull a boiler that would have been replaced in 2041 to 2025, what would the cost be? And it's the mix of all these parameters that is helping us make the decision. But I'm happy to share we have a number of buildings that are shovel in the ground that are being built to net zero emission. I will share the first, Weavers Hill, but there's a number of whole building retrofits down to bundle retrofits of components together, and even some individual components. But zooming in on Weavers Hill, which is a case study that I did want to present here, we selected one of our largest building. The building footprint is on the top right corner of the slide, and it is one of the poorest energy performance that we have in our building stock. And by virtue, it is a large GHG emitter, but we also had $1 million in SOGR spending on planned mechanical equipment replacement. So our office came in, we did a feasibility study, and identified 2 options to take the building to a low carbon pathway. I'll go through this fairly quickly. Option 1 identified technologies for heat pump and fuel switching. which brought about 91% GHG emission reduction with no net operating expenditure impact. Option 2 had a much higher price tag. By the way, option 1 was 12 million. Option 2 is roughly 3 times the price, but a smaller GHG emission reduction, but it had a full, by smaller, I mean a smaller marginal increment from option 1, a 91 versus 93, but it had a complete building retrofit, envelope, wall, windows repair, replacement with the low carbon mechanical equipment. Our office was obviously requesting approval for option 2, but given that this is a pilot, our council has approved option 1, which we're proceeding forward with, knowing in the future we can also upgrade the envelope. But I do want to touch on some of the metrics, which would be interesting. So again, looking at the fuel types against the baseline if we did nothing, and the 90% GHG emission reduction. So as you can see, we've moved off natural gas completely, but the total energy reduction has also dropped by roughly 41%. And the GHG emission reduction went, or the GHG emissions went from 1,100 tons to 100 tons. So a significant GHG emission reduction. But again, the utility and operating cost, which is always any building operator's concern, was a marginal reduction. So it is in all respects a good business case. But I do also want to share that FCM FCM is a key funding partner and stakeholder in this project. FCM has supported us with 175,000 study grant for us to be able to study this these feasibility and identify the low carbon options. But also the region of Peel was successful in achieving the $10 million capital grant funding from FCM to support this project, which is a loan and a grant mix that is dependent on the energy reduction by the project. So shifting gears again to the last section of my slides, I do want to touch on the net zero emission building retrofit standard. Now, this is a retrofit standard that we are developing, knowing that we will be retrofitting all our buildings, at least the 95 affordable housing buildings will be prioritized. And our approach to developing the net zero emission retrofit standard is pretty much similar to the new construction standard, which is a lot easier. We will develop a standard, a procedure, and a policy that will be supporting the standard. It will be aligned with the energy and emissions management plan. Again, all the good work that the models and the consultants and our engineering team has brought out, we will align with that and allow obviously for a transition period to move over from a business plan to a low carbon approach. And I can share offline some of the challenges we have faced with our property owners and project management teams. And on the last slide, the net zero emission building retrofit considerations will be a zero carbon goal by 2050. You know, most of the buildings that we retrofit by 2030 will also be in place by 2050, but we will look at the archetype, vintage, and condition. And it would be a building level or a system level retrofit. And work has started literally this week on the net zero emission building standard. And I'm hoping by early next year, I can share some of the good work that has come out of our building retrofit standard. And that's the last slide from my end. Thank you very much. So I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Hamed. That was a fantastic presentation. Just gonna quickly share my screen and introduce our second speaker. Okay, so I'd like to introduce as our second speaker, Mike Fletcher. Mike's a project manager with the Climate Change and Resiliency Unit at the City of Ottawa. So now, Mike, I'd like to invite you, turn your camera on and share your slides.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, very pleased to be here. Great to get this invitation from FCM. And I think building on what Hamed had to say, this is another presentation that dovetails quite well with it. So I'm going to talk about one particular facility mostly in this presentation and what we're learning from doing a deep retrofit in it. And we're part of the way through, and I'll get into that in the presentation. Ottawa Explained. We're on Algonquin territory, pleased to be here. And this is a favorite map of people at the City of Ottawa. You might recognize some of these other cities which geographically fit inside Ottawa. There's about 1 million people. In 2000, we went from being a double-tiered municipality with a region to being single-tiered. Managing this huge area, there's an urban boundary, and then a green belt, and then a rural area, and some rural villages, which are a fair size. And we're very diverse. So, for example, the rural areas were townships, and we have community buildings there that were built by volunteers, for example, which is vastly different from some buildings in the more central part of the city. This is just a little bit of a layout of where this retrofit fits in the big scheme of things. We have a climate change master plan that looks at mitigating emissions and climate resiliency. In that, we have something on net zero buildings compared to plans for transportation and community heating and other projects. And within the net zero buildings, we're looking at pilots to 5 or 6 existing buildings. And we're also looking to update our municipal green building standard for the corporation's buildings. And under those 5 to 6 retrofits, we have Hintonburg, our topic for today. Hintonburg is in the area west of downtown. It was built in '84. It has a few different amenities, a gym at the back, a community police station, daycare, some kitchens. It's heavily used. Didn't even get much of a dip. Well, got something of a dip during the pandemic, but it's back to being very, very busy. And it's known by staff doing the retrofit. And actually, me in particular, I worked there doing kind of more standard energy conservation over the years before I joined the climate team. So I know the building fairly well, and that's a nice advantage. Deep retrofits for us, according to our climate model, require a 60 to 70% drop in thermal energy demand for heating, depending on the building, and that's kind of an average score. And over the years, at this building, we've done quite a bit of work. And so you can see the graph is just how gas consumption has dropped. And there's also been a nice drop in electricity, and we've done a lot of measures. So we're starting off with a building that's performing reasonably well, and we know it, which, for a first deep retrofit is an advantage as opposed to walking into a building that hasn't seen a lot of work recently. Early work, we actually got some drone infrared imaging of quite a few of the city buildings. We got this one on there. It was kind of high level work. We didn't get into doing the calibration of actual heat loss in detail from all the surfaces. So kind of semi-qualitative, but good enough to give us some ideas. The other things that helped us, we have very good utility trends for all our buildings, so this one included. We did some site inspections, and we built a concept report. So that's kind of what we had leading into this. Doing a deep retrofit, and Hammett alluded to this a little bit with the one place where Peel has gone to work, but we're kind of the same. You have to make some decisions on what to do and what not to do based on cost, mostly based on cost, I would say. So we're doing over 90% of the windows. We're doing energy recovery ventilation, some targeted insulating kind of based on that thermographic imaging work, and heat pumps, both air and ground source. So that's kind of the left-hand side of this slide, what we're doing. The right-hand side, off the list, the vestibules, we know are just very much heated all winter. The heating's kind of oversized. We didn't go after windows there. We didn't do extensive building envelope work. We did some targeted insulating, and that's about it. We didn't do extensive changes to hydronic systems because that gets quite expensive. And we went from planning to have the entire building done by ground source heat pumps to a mix of ground and air source. And that was a decision kind of made on the fly as we started analyzing costs. Big measure we've gotten into doing is windows. We've become a fan of windows with multi-PES layers between two panes of glass. We're putting in R11 versions in Hintonburg, and that's right, R11, quite high. If you get them thick enough, they can go above R18. But the windows were original windows. And, you know, if you do a back of the envelope on heat loss, or alternatively go into more detail, you'll find a good hunk of heat leaving the building through normal kind of two-pane windows. And so we decided that was something we could tackle with this. And I think the other thing, the last bullet here is an important one. So when you're going to heat pumps that are hydronic, you can have a real challenge trying to heat the building with the existing hydronic system. And often hydronic rads are associated with windows. If you can make the windows basically have an R value getting close to walls, then you can get away without having to do a lot of upgrades on the hydronic system. So in a way, the window measure works to avoid another prospective expense in existing buildings. And I think that's a key learning we've had. Yeah, we've done some work on how to put them into curtain walls. I could write, yeah, I could spend half a day on that, actually. We've worked with an architect and we've done some testing. Because again, windows are important. There's a lot of heat loss there. And so we're really sweating this detail. So much so that when it came time to look at the curtain walls and look at the window install, there we did infrared imaging in more detail. We pressurized a room and subpressurized and overpressurized a room and tried different treatments on the frames because our high-level scan showed the frames were a big source of heat loss, even though they're supposed to be thermally broken, maybe not so much. So we tried a few different treatments, worked with the architects on these treatments, and have found some things that we will use on the main curtain wall in the building. So this is just a small one, bit of a long story, but this is just 4 windows in a room. We have one that goes up 2.5 stories and is 4 meters wide. So it's a big curtain wall. And we'll apply what we learned in this small area to the big curtain wall when we work on it this September. This is I was encouraged by FCM to be a little forward looking on the last slides and think about what we're learning and what we should do. A technical thing would be gravity rads in buildings. We have a lot of them. And often they work by by having fairly hot heating water. And if we're switching off gas onto things like heat pumps, high temperature heating water can present a challenge for the heat pumps. So we really need to do something about gravity rads. I have looked for solutions, off-the-shelf solutions. You kind of notice in the inset here, I've got a fan, which is really from a computer server. It shows I'm getting a little desperate and I'm willing to get creative. I think we need somebody to get creative with this problem and get something that we can use. But I really think this is a huge issue. It sounds like I'm zeroing in on something, or it might sound I'm zeroing in on something that's a niggling detail, but the wheel was a niggling detail at one point. I think for retrofitting buildings in Canada, this is a big one, and we need to figure something out for this. Rules and lessons. I think Especially if you're going into piloting and everybody's trying to get used to doing a deep retrofit, start with a building in good shape. I couldn't have imagined trying to write the concept report if I was just reading, 6-year-old condition assessments of the building and trying to decide what to do. I knew this building was in good shape, and that made things immeasurably easier so far. Have a good building automation system. The trending I was able to do over the winter on the building automation system has informed the sizing of the heat pump. And so much so that I could say within a couple percent what the size of the heat pump has to be. So that's been very valuable. Work can be done in stages with course corrections along the way. In doing this retrofitting, we're not taking the building out of commission for months and months. So how can we do it? Well, we can do the windows, which we did. We did them last fall. And then we can trend how the building performs on the coldest day of the winter, decide what the building's new windows really did for us, and then design from there. So recognize that you can do things like that. And, I know the last lesson here, number 4, I know often in project planning, innovation gets frowned on a little bit because it can introduce uncertainty. But I think in some cases we're in a place where we need to innovate to really hit our goals. So I think the best adage is to innovate if you have to, and would say in this case we kind of have to. And just some ideas. Just to control costs, just try and integrate everything with life cycle work. I mentioned, we didn't do the envelope. The roof for this building will be on a life cycle schedule. And when we come back and it's time to do the roof, we'll improve the thermal performance of the roof. The second item, I think many practitioners in this area are under some pressure to, have good returns from their work. That's hard when you're trying to eliminate all the combustion-based heating. I think we can get some modest return on money spent, but it's not the greatest. Maybe it's important to also think of deep retrofitting as a way to fight a form of pollution, the greatest one we face right now. So it's a bit we make a building better, perhaps knock down the annual cost of running it a bit. But we should also view that it's also about fighting pollution, not really trying to get rich off it necessarily. And really consider the wider benefits, like I'm saying. So utility system costs. So where we're reducing the total amount of energy, our local utility, our distribution companies will not have as much of a struggle reinforcing or increasing the size of utility systems, and that's got to help. We maybe don't see that directly when we do a return on investment, but it's there. It helps the community. We're keeping a building in a state of good repair, and we're also going to improve climate resiliency. And just a few thoughts on policy and programs. Consider community-based funding for communal things. So district energy, maybe geothermal studies. Let's avoid lengthy applications for more standard measures. So I think as we get into a groove doing more deep retrofitting, we'll see some things that are fairly standard to do. And can we make any kind of incentive programs more standardized so that is the administered burden is somewhat reduced. And the last question is just wondering where the money is for the marsh sector from carbon pricing in parts of Canada that are on the federal backstop for carbon pricing or for the federal climate plan. That could be what I'm talking about in the second bullet, is just standard amounts of money for standard measures. for community buildings. Think about how municipalities get some of the gas tax. So yeah, that'd be my little soapbox on that. And that's it. Je peux répondre aux questions en français également. Thanks a
I
lot.
can answer questions in French as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. You could stop sharing your screen. I'll just bring this over. Perfect. To the Q&A portion. And as I mentioned earlier, I encourage everyone to put their questions in the box, the Q&A box at the bottom, so that we can get to them. Let's pull up the box. And might start with one that I saw in the box earlier, and I think it can be asked to both of you, which is, are deep building retrofits for affordable housing being performed on occupied or unoccupied buildings? Our team is struggling with how to do deep building retrofits on occupied social and affordable housing projects. And I might start with you, Amand. And then Mike, if you could also talk about how keeping the community building in use as the retrofits and work going on in Ottawa.
Thanks for that question. I think that's a great question. It is a bit of a challenge, and it is a major consideration from our housing folks. If there's envelope upgrades that we do need to take, the tenants will be impacted. And that's one of the reasons why option 2 for Weavers Hill was not supported, because it would mean having to take everyone out, gut the building completely, and upgrade the envelope. So it is a challenge we're facing as well. We are looking into some technologies with modular building envelope replacement from the outside, but there's a restriction on how high the building can be. But we're working with our building property owners to try and find ways to be able to retrofit buildings, specifically with the envelope, with minimal tenant impact. I don't really give a detailed answer, but that's I do echo the challenge that you're facing.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, Emma, I don't work in the community housing field. That's a little bit arm's length at the city. Though I'm aware that a lot of deep retrofitting is being done by Ottawa Community Housing. And they are managing they're managing to do those retrofits as people are basically occupying the buildings. So I don't know day by day if they're there. In some cases, I think they're probably being accommodated. As Hemant was alluding to, they have done external wall panels, which I think all the work was from the outside. A very interesting project. The Ottawa Community Housing actually built the wall panels themselves with their own employees, which I think is really amazing. But how to handle the tenants, which is the whole point, the tenants. I'm not sure. I'm not sure the exact details. Sorry.
Yeah, I was also wondering about if you could talk about the Hintonburg Community Center and the continued use while the retrofits were going on and are going on.
Yeah, so not too tricky really. The windows have been room by room. So it's just been a case of scheduling using the rooms and kind of, making sure the contractor is sticking to a schedule so that then, when a lot of time is up, the space goes back to being available. Everything else, in terms of mechanical equipment, we have a plan to manage cutover from like existing gas to ground source heat pump. We don't think that'll be too tricky. It's just a case of doing it component by component and area by area. And this disruption has been not too bad. Perhaps the most challenging thing I do see coming will be drilling the geothermal wells. That will be a little bit disruptive, but I think that's about the worst thing we have. So it's just a question of scheduling, etc.
Thank you. Yeah, great presentations, both of you. I did have a couple questions. So one is, I guess, for Mike and can be expanded to Hemant as well. Mike, you mentioned that one of the key sort of data inputs for your retrofit work was that building automation system, that BAS system, and that was being a key first step in knowing really where your energy consumption was. Is that something that you had previously installed in this building, like knowing that retrofits would likely be coming, or is this something that's standard across, all of the City of Ottawa owned buildings? And then do you have like a plan, I guess, for how you can use that data to plan out some of your next retrofits and what your next steps are? And then similarly, Hemant, sort of the same question to you if you have those systems in place.
Yeah, it's a great question. Fortunately, the system and all the useful attributes of the system have been around for a little while. So the City of Ottawa, because it's partially rural and there's facilities spread kind of far and wide, they got a web-based system as a standard platform for all the building automation systems in the city. So everything goes into a web-based platform, and it's set up to be able to trend everything. So that means I don't have to go to the facility. The 2 nights in February that set record lows in Ottawa, and I wanted to know how hard it was to set the building. I was able to set up the trends from my home office here a few days ahead of time. Kind of the night before, they make sure they worked, and talk to the facility and say, hey, I'm gonna keep your building running overnight. You won't see a night setback or anything like that. We're gonna pretend it's daytime, and I'm gonna get a bunch of data. So all of that's existed here for a while. I think going forward, it'd just be a case of, when I make my lessons learned, I'll emphasize how useful it was and how I employed it, and the other practitioners at the city will be able to see that and use it.
Great, thanks.
Do you want me to touch on
Yeah,
that,
do you
Jesse,
have the
or do you have
similar systems within your buildings, or what's the
Yeah,
data
and
sharing in there?
yeah, I'm interested to see some of that data, Mike. I think that sounds like a very advanced system. We are more on the metering side. So we have all our buildings are metered, and we have almost 12 years of data. So there's a lot of historical data and seasonal data that we work on. We haven't yet gotten to the level of the building automation system and doing the controls. There, we're trying to kind of tier it with looking at the mechanical equipment, but behavioral based set points and building automation system is something that we will be looking at in the very near future.
Great, thank you. Okay, Emma, I'm noticing the time. Maybe I'll pass it back to you to pass it back to Naomi, or maybe we can go straight to Naomi.
Yeah, Naomi, I would like to welcome you to give your presentation about funding opportunities. So with that, I'll invite Naomi DeVist, who is an advisor with our program outreach team.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma. Are you able to see my screen okay? I think I might have to go. How's that?
All good. Looks perfect.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for inviting me to be here. I'm happy to take just a few minutes of your time to share some details on the funding that we have. So it was really neat to see some examples of projects that have received some green municipal funding support in the previous 2 presentations. So I'll take just a few minutes to run through the funding that we have available in case it aligns with any of the work that you are doing. So very quickly, the GMF and our funding opportunities have been around for a little while now. just over 20 years. We're now at $1.6 billion in terms of the investments that have been made in the program by the federal government. And in the time we've been around, we've funded, gosh, almost 2,000 projects now. So we have a lot of examples of the neat work that's happened. And by the way, we also do have a database on our website that gives examples of the projects that have been funded, which can be a very helpful place to look sometimes. So in terms of the work that we fund, we work across 5 sectors. I am especially going to talk about energy today, just given the focus of this particular webinar, but we do also have funding for transport, waste, water, and land use. What I will say as kind of a big asterisk to all the funding that we have right now is that our funding for our core offer, which is across these 5 sectors, we're in the process of updating it. So in 2024, we will have new funding criteria. So any applications that align with the funding criteria that are on our website today, and which I'll share with you a little bit more detail on, really those applications should be coming in before the end of this calendar year, December 2023. But in the future, we will continue to offer funding in all 5 of these sectors. It's just that the specific criteria will be a little bit different. So in terms of who this funding is available to, any Canadian municipal government can apply in any province, whether or not you're a member of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And we can also give funding to partners of municipalities. So be a private sector entity, municipally owned corporation, a nonprofit. If you're applying in partnership with a municipality, that can be one way to receive funding for a project, depending on the specifics of the work and who's incurring the costs and things like that. So this is a little bit more detail on the different types of projects that we can fund in each of those 5 sectors. So under energy, we can fund new construction of buildings, so any municipally owned facility. And here the target is to apply or to aim to achieve net zero energy performance. We can also fund retrofits of existing facilities that are aiming to reduce fuel use and GHG emissions. And then thinking of community energy, which I know is something that Mike had mentioned, that is something that the Green Municipal Fund has funding for. So we can fund energy recovery or district energy projects. And community energy in particular will continue to be a big focus of our funding, even when it changes in 2024. So you know, even if you're thinking of future projects and you're not sure that applying before the end of this year is feasible, district energy, but also the building sector, those will all continue to be big areas of focus. So definitely worth reaching out and keeping the Green Municipal Fund in mind if you have projects like that you may be working on. Very quickly, transport, waste, water, and land use, again, we'll continue to fund projects in those sectors. One thing that will be changing is that we will have more of a focus on greenhouse gas emissions across all of our sectors. So within those projects, if you are working on one that has a big greenhouse gas emissions impact, that might be something that it's worth coming to speak with us as well about. In terms of dollar amounts, so for our core offer, what we're able to fund right now is projects at a few different stages. So the funding is really kind of built to support you depending wherever you may be. So if you're a bit earlier on, we can provide funding for feasibility studies. So maybe you're looking at designs, data collection, assessing what your baseline performance is, for example, in terms of energy consumption. And for a feasibility study, we can provide a grant of up to $175,000, and it's matching funding, so we can provide up to half of costs. For pilot projects, we can provide a grant of up to $500,000. So this is really something where you've done a study already, and maybe you're looking to test something at a small scale on a more temporary basis. And then finally, we do have funding for full construction. So our capital project funding can cover up to 80% of project costs to maximum financing of $10 million. So the majority of this is a loan, but it does come with a supporting grant. So that grant is worth 15% of the loan. Just so for some easy numbers, if you got $1 million loan, that would mean a $150,000 grant. And so in terms of interest rates, we really aim to be competitive. And then that sort of grant portion really helps offset that interest rate even further. So beyond those 5 sectors that I shared, these are 3 new funding programs or streams that were created in 2019. These 3, by the way, won't be changing in 2024. They'll stay the same in terms of the specific criteria. So anything you see on our website or speak with us about today, that'll stay the same. So the first initiative, community efficiency financing, this is really focused on the residential sector. So the idea here is that a municipality can apply to GMF for funding to help create a financing program where the municipality helps finance homeowners to do retrofits of their homes. So this is really new sector for us, but we've seen a lot of uptake in the program. Similar to CORE, we can fund feasibility studies. We can also fund capital projects where municipalities are coming to go put those programs in place. We also have our sustainable affordable housing initiative. So this has sort of 2 targets for eligibility. One is in terms of affordable rent. So a certain proportion of the units need to be below market rate to apply, but also the projects need to target a certain energy performance. So we can fund, again, retrofits of existing affordable housing or construction of new units. And finally, our community buildings retrofit program. So this was created because we were getting a lot of inquiries from community buildings. So that's to say hockey arenas, libraries, sports facilities, recreational facilities, which can be big energy consumers, are really important to the community. And there are many that are also getting a bit older and could use some repairs. So the CBR initiative is really focused on retrofits of community centers. And it's also designed to help plan for retrofits over the longer term. So I was thinking a little bit about this when Mike was speaking, that this funding really helps support studies where you're planning over the course of maybe up to 10 or 20 years, when is the best time to do retrofits to be most cost effective. And this is one where we can fund those studies, but also the capital projects. So that is really a speed tour of the funding that we have. My contact information is up here on the screen. I would say if there is one takeaway, it's that, please feel free to reach out. Myself or my colleagues would be really happy to speak with you to see what you're working on, and maybe if there could be some alignment with the funding that we do have. So I'll leave it there.